Many years ago, quite a few years ago, I was trying to learn how to scuba dive. I'd always enjoyed swimming and bobbing on the surface of the water looking down, and thought it would be fun to be able to walk around on the bottom. So when I was on a holiday where such a thing was possible, I started learning. Early on, I had an unfortunate moment where I got a little panicky because the water was murky, and it introduced an element of fear into the project, which I tried to overcome and did manage to enjoy myself somewhat. A year passed and another holiday came, and now I had a little certification, I was going to do the scuba diving again. But the night before the first time I was going to go out, I was really, really scared. I was so scared that I was really sick to my stomach and just terrified. And it was all completely irrational. The frightening moment had just been going from the top down to the bottom. There had been a sort of a murky place in the middle. And in that murky place, I didn't know whether I was up or down, and it got very panicky to me. Of course, the fact that I was underwater, which is not a normal habitat for a human being, it was hard for me to forget. Other people could forget, but I had a hard time forgetting that it was all dependent on this whole thing. But scuba diving was just a catalyst for a very other interesting experience. I've been on the path for many years. At that time, too, I'd been on the path for a long time. I spend a lot of time telling other people that they ought to have courage and faith in God, which is a good job, but it does put a certain amount of pressure on you when the chips are down. And the chips were down, and so was I. Basically lying awake all night with cramps in my stomach that I knew were not caused by anything I'd eaten, just realizing that I was going to have to do this again. I mean, this is a holiday. I'm paying a lot of money for it, but it was also, of course, the option of simply not following through was also there. But my life is lived mostly in my mind, so the opportunities that I have to experience physical challenge or physical courage are very, very few. The master Yogananda drew these funny pictures in one of his lessons. If people looked the way their consciousness was oriented, and he had pictures of people who were nothing but big bellies, or things like that. And I've always, in that picture, I always think of myself as a little pair of shoes carrying around a giant mouth. It's always moving like this. So all the part in between was just sort of to carry my mouth around so that it could talk. So I really wanted to face into this because I was so scared. And I prayed. I mean, naturally I prayed, Divine Mother, there's really no reason to fear. It's just some irrational thing that got into my head. But I was impressed by the fact that she was silent. I mean, I didn't get the slightest comfort. And that was contrary to my philosophy, but nonetheless it was my actual experience. And there's a saying in bird watching that you have the bird book where you see something and then you look it up and you try to figure out what you're looking at. My aunt and uncle were avid bird watchers, so I was aware of the whole method. But there's a principle that says if you see the bird and you look at it in the book, and the book tells you that the bird is different, should be different, it says, believe the bird. Which is a very good expression. So I knew my philosophy, but I had to believe my experience, which is that I was scared and there was no comfort. And then a very odd connection came into my mind. I know last week Vivekadevi spoke about intuition and reason. Sometimes reason just drops out and you know something without knowing why. And this very odd connection was made in my mind between Divine Mother's lack of sympathy for me in what was a state of real distress, and a certain person that had lived in our community for a period of time, that I must have had some negative karma with the person. Don't even try to guess, they're long gone, okay? I must have had some negative past life karma with that person because I just never liked them. And they had a very rough start in life, and they were not graceful in the way they handled things, and just I could give lots of justifications why I didn't have an affinity for the person. But the fact of the matter was I had no sympathy for them, just none. And I'm lying there terrified in the middle of the night, out of the country, thinking, Divine Mother has no compassion for me because I never had any compassion for that person. And it was like just an absolute even trade. It's like, this is what it feels like to need sympathy for fear, and this is what it feels like not to get it. You know, how does that work for you? Do you like that? Is that really the kind of person that you want to be? Now, I'd love to say that in the moment the fear went away. It didn't. I finally just went out in the boat, and as soon as I went into the water, I was fine. It was all anticipatory rather than actual. I came home and I was so nice to that person. I mean, they probably just didn't know what hit them. Just all of a sudden, you know, from just being the ice queen, I was just the mother of all mothers, you know. But what I really understood was really simply, and this is such a simple philosophical point, but it's the essence of the spiritual path. We live in the world that we create. And there's a lot made of that now in prosperity teaching and all that sort of thing, and this idea that we can have it all. I'm very impressed by the wave that's going across the country by Michelle Obama, who has written this book, which I haven't read, but she's an obviously extremely impressive woman. And she is answering the question, can a woman, because women are the ones who are asking the question, but it's a valid question for a human being, you know, can you have everything you want in life? So the question that women are often asked is, can you have it all? She said, no. It's just such a simple, obvious answer, no. You know, it's just not possible to say that everything I want, I'm going to get. I was, and this is just about women and life, but I was very impressed by some, I don't even remember who it was, some very well-known public figure. She was on television or something like that. At the height of her career, she resigned. She said there are these elements in life. She says there's my career, my husband's career, my children's well-being, and my marriage. She said, after a while, I figured that I could have 3, but I really couldn't have 4, that it wasn't possible to spread my consciousness, she didn't use that word, but myself, so she resigned her job. Because when she looked at the whole thing, that's what she decided was the way it was going to survive. Now, that is simply a more realistic way of looking at it. And that's what Michelle Obama said. I helped my husband become president. There's a joke about the Obamas that I loved. She, let's see, they went to a restaurant somewhere where, I guess they grew up in Chicago. And this man who turned out to own the restaurant, this is not a true story. This is the man who owned the restaurant turned out to be an old friend of hers. In fact, she had dated him at one time. This is how the story goes. And so he ran this nice restaurant. He gave him a nice table. Isn't it wonderful? And then her husband starts teasing her. He said, well, if you had married him, and then he goes to the restaurant. He was already president like this, to the restaurant. All this could have been yours. She said, teasing her, of course, and she said, no, actually, dear. She said, if I had married him, he would have been president and you would be running this restaurant. Regardless of the truth, I'm not an advocate for the power of women necessarily, so don't misread me here for those of you who don't know me. But it's too good a story to pass up. But the whole point is, and this is where I was starting, is we have these huge prosperity theories. And, you know, we can have whatever we want. You know, we have the power to manifest. And this is not an untrue teaching. I would call it more an incomplete teaching. Because we have to go through different stages of development. And the lowest stage of development is that we're just passive in this world, that it simply happens to us, and that we're helpless in the waves of fate, and nothing has a purpose. And then we get to the point where we realize we can put out energy, and we can make a difference. I can be successful in the world. I can work hard. I can raise my children well. I can learn to get along with people. And it takes discipline and effort, and I can influence my destiny. But then what also happens is that we get, as ego beings, we get kind of puffed up with that thought. And what's really happening in our world, really big time, is all this power is sort of coming into the ego, and I can have it all. I can do what I want. I can set my mind to it. And it works. It's better than being passive, but sooner or later we start hitting these realities that we just simply can't change. When the 1989, the earthquake that knocked down a piece of the Bay Bridge, and I had a very, very short career going into corporations and trying to be a little corporate trainer. That was something I tried. It was not my cup of tea, but I had a little, like tiny little flare of success. And in that bridge collapse, the wife of one of the employees of the company I was working for, was killed. And of course, like, how many people were killed in that, and what did it require for you to be right in that spot when that piece of the bridge came down? I mean, a lot, from my point of view, a lot of karmic forces had to all cross, that of all the people in the world, it would be this one. So a lot of people in that company who are, welcome to Silicon Valley, we can do it, which is an absolutely wonderful philosophy, and I like being here. People really believe we can do it, and as a consequence, we do. Tremendous self-made wealth, creativity, ideas. It's a marvelous atmosphere, and a spiritual one in its own way. God-inspired in many ways. So they wanted me to come in and do something about the fact that everybody was so freaked out about this woman being killed on the bridge. Of course, the rule when you're in corporate America is that you can never mention God, because you simply can't be inclusive enough to include you can't include every religion, and then if you include every religion, you've left out the atheists, so you just can't do it. You can say greater reality, you can say energy, there's lots of ways you work around it, but you cannot say God. So this woman wants me to come in there and make everybody feel better about this woman getting crushed on the bridge without mentioning God. Well, I mean, it was an interesting challenge. So I sat on the phone, though, for a little while. I said, I can't do it. There's no truth I could tell these people that doesn't require a surrender of I am in charge. And if I am not in charge, who is in charge? I mean, you can't just kind of randomly give power to the tree or the automobile or the computer. It's just like there is a greater reality, and we have to attune ourselves to it. And we make ourselves strong until we hit that wall. And everybody at some point in their many incarnations, by no means in one, but in millions of incarnations, we get so good at making it work that we hit the limits of making it work. This is Michelle Obama, who's standing up and giving a very good message to America. It's pretty hard to imagine a person who could be doing it more effectively. You don't have to like her or approve of her position or anything, but she's very effective at being a person making life happen. And she too is you just hit the wall, you can't do it. So the corporate lady says to me, the HR lady says to me, well, can't you? I said, you have to have faith in God. There's no answer to death and random death, except the fact that there is a beneficent, beneficial power that is running this universe that loves us despite all evidence. She says on the phone to me, can't you just tell them to have faith in themselves? I said, do you think that man's faith in himself could have saved his wife from dying? And she, who understood me, which is why she had hired me, said, no. I said, no, of course, it couldn't. And Divine Mother, unfortunately, has this way of getting our attention. Because as long as it's all going well, who looks around? It's all going just the way I want it, and I'm just going to keep doing this, and then the bridge collapses on somebody you love. or a plane goes down. A man that I don't know personally, but who contacted me, one of his children, a plane went down. It wasn't a big commercial plane, it was just a small plane. It just went down. Beautiful young woman in the, just at the gateway of her life. She just goes off on a trip with some friends in a private plane, and she and all her friends gone like that. That was enough. Exactly 1 year later, that latest plane crash, same day. He writes to me, he says, "You know why, on this day of all days?" So I remember that story that the Buddha tells, that beautiful story, which many of you know, but it's such a beautiful story. A woman comes to the Buddha. She has in her arms her baby that has just died. She knows that this is a God-knowing man. She comes to him and she says, "Restore life to my child." He says, "Oh yes, of course I can." He said, "But I'll need a little bit of cooking oil to do that. So you have to go, you can't go to the market and buy it. You have to go get it from one of your neighbors. So you have to go ask one of your neighbors to give you a little bit of cooking oil." The woman is thrilled. "I can get the oil, I can bring it back, my child will come to life again." Just as she's walking away, the Buddha says, "Ah yes, but you must get it from a house that has never been touched by death." So the woman goes house to house to house to house to house to house. Every house, "My servant has died, my uncle has died, one of my children has died." Every house has been touched by death, because this is the way it is. Now that doesn't say, oh, it's dark and evil. It's just that this world is not what it seems. It's just so simple when you're impersonal about it. And unless we have this tremendous angst about it, it's just a fact. So of course, the woman comes back with her child and no words are required. The Buddha blesses her and the woman takes and cremates or buries the baby, releases it into the river, is what they do in India. Sometimes the first time we went to India, 1986, and we went to Varanasi where the Ganges flows. And it was before there was so much terrorism, and it was easier. We went, it was an eclipse of the full moon. This is my first trip to India, and it's eclipse of the full moon. Some of you were on that trip. The eclipse was like at 10 p.m. at night. We were allowed to get on boats and float out into the middle of the Ganges. And Varanasi is this very old city, and it's all on one side of the river like this, and all these ghats, these stairs down. So we're, all these Americans, just like this. There are thousands of people on the ghats. Ghats are these stairs that lead down to the water, waiting for the eclipse of the moon so that they could all go into the water. I did not know, I didn't know what planet I was on. It was so outside of my ordinary American experience to see that, and it was so just powerful to watch that. And then coming up, this family, after all of that was done and we were back on shore and we were just sort of staggering like this, this man comes downstairs and he has a small bundle in his arms. And our guide explained to us this was his own baby who had died. And the tradition is that if a child is too young, they don't cremate the child, they give the body to the Ganges. This man is carrying his own baby, and he goes out in a boat, and they weight the body with stones, and he drops it into the river. Now, at that time in my life, I don't think I'd ever been with anyone even who had died. I'd never seen death in any form. This man's consigning the body of his own child to the river. I think, which is the higher civilization? The one that just gives us the illusion that with enough money and enough power and enough determination and enough affirmation, I can just make it work the way I want it to work? Or the one where it's just, there it is, it's just happening all around you. And we have to live through all these experiences. Now this is the great challenge. And Jesus has this very simple statement, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Well, that shouldn't be too hard, should it? Just be nice, love people, be nice even to this guy that I didn't like very much, But the purity of heart is something much more than that. It's really, what do we think life is? Where do we think happiness comes from? Is there actually anybody in charge? Can I really just make up my mind and have it my way? We just finished our school play, and I work with the costumes on that, so I finally figured out the word for it. It's my hobby, is what it actually is. In my position, it's hard to have a lot of hobbies, but theater and children, that's my hobby. So for 6 weeks, I get to be part of this, and some of the kids are really tiny, and they go, the bigger ones are bigger than me, and the tiny ones are really tiny, little. I'm looking back this way because my position changing costumes was back in these rooms here with the doors open, so I watched the play mostly from the doors. And there was a little scene in the kindergarten, as those of you here were all dressed as mice. They were so darling, these little gray things, and then there were little cats, and they all had little ears. And they did this thing where they would go around in circles. And this one little girl, she just couldn't resist. She would wave at us here, and she would wave at us here, and then she would come back again. And as part of the play, there was like a character hidden over here. Every time she'd come by, she'd wave. She was just so excited, to just be doing it. And the whole concept of that being inappropriate just didn't enter her mind, and there was no point in even mentioning it. And the older children, of course, just did a magnificent job. One of the middle school girls who was the viceroy, she did it with a lot of panache. Afterwards, she's playing basketball out here. I said, "Well, an hour ago you were the viceroy of Spain's proudest possession. Now you're just a high school kid again, a middle school kid again." The theater really gives us all these experiences, and seeing the children enter into it. Of course, that's what it is. We enter into it. And theater is marvelous because you do get to experience these worlds. You get to be the viceroy of this powerful place in the world. You get to order the death of the Incan king. You sort of get to relive, is really what we're doing, or live for the first time, all these possibilities. Because in truth, Master tells us we have lived all these possibilities. There's this, it's just the mind, the rational mind absolutely breaks at some of this philosophy. Master tells us that anything in human experience that you're no longer drawn to do, whatever it might be, is because you have already experienced it. You've experienced what pleasure it can give you and what pain it can give you, and you have satisfied yourself completely that it's not what you're seeking anymore. So every time you see somebody who's unhappy or who's cruel or who's pursuing foolishness or who's crazy on the street or has a substance problem or who beats his children, any of those things that you recoil from and don't want to have any part of anymore, is because you've tried it. Because we are created by God for reasons I certainly can't explain and won't even try to explain, with this belief that there's going to be satisfaction outside of ourselves. And we don't take anybody's word for it. Nobody listens to anybody, really. I mean, we're polite. Parents think that they really have mastery over their children until their children get a little freedom. And then all of a sudden, you discover, sometimes to your dismay, sometimes to your joy, that this child that you've nurtured has a whole different destiny than you ever thought they were going to have. Because we are there determined. I was 10. Some of you have heard me say this. I was 10 years. I look at 10-year-olds now, and I really respect them because I remember it. I remember when I was 10, I fell in with bad companions. They were much more fun than the good kids. They were really, in the time I was growing up, bad was very minor compared to what it is now. But they were not a good influence on me, at least so my family thought. But I thought they were great. And I remember my parents trying to influence me. And I was a small kid. And I just remember like this. And I declared, "The die is cast." That's what I said. I said, "I'm either a good kid or a bad kid, and there's nothing you can do about it now." But the thing about it was true. I knew they could control me, and I was small enough for them to lift up and carry somewhere. My dad could have still. But I knew I was myself. I just was myself, and I always had been, and I still am, and so are all of us. You know, we are on this track of where we think happiness is going to come from, and we create. But we don't create it by ourselves. We create it. Superconscious is also a nice word. You know, we live kind of under the lid of the pot. It's like we have a lid like right here, and so this is the world that we see. We don't even know there's a lid there. But the fact is, when that lid comes off, we realize that what we live is this reality that goes all the way to infinity, and it's the infinity part that's guiding us. We're this huge inverted triangle, and we are the tiniest, most compressed. We are the smallest we will ever be right now. We're just tiny. And really what's happening is we're being moved by this river force. And that force is the accumulated experience of all the times we tried it and found out whether it worked or not. I tried not liking that person. And I did it fairly steadily. It wasn't really the center of my life, but just as a regular rule, I didn't enjoy their company. And I had a hard time being patient. And what happened was I sent a boomerang force out into the world that says, well, you're going to need comfort sometime and you're not going to find it. And that's how we learn. I'm going to depend entirely on the immortality of my child. You know, I'm going to just put my faith in the immortality of my child. But there's no reality to that. We can't just have faith in something that is untrue. It's just as simple as that. There are truths to this world, and when we live by them, then we are supported. And when we violate them, something happens. And sometimes we cruise along for many incarnations. It's like that woman, she decided that there were 4 realities she was trying to maintain, and one of them had to go. Just on her own, she just made the decision. One of them had to go. Because I have to make choices. And that's what happens in this world. We have to make choices. It's pleasurable to dislike people. It's pleasurable to feel superior to them. It's pleasurable to have it be their fault. And often, annoyingly, it is their fault. They are icky. Really, they're icky. But as one of my dear friends said to me once, and how is that working for you? You know, not very well. I get the satisfaction of being right and them being wrong, but I create a universe in which they're wrong. And then, oh, what a surprise. I get the same thing back all the time. And how does that feel when it comes at you? Not as good as when I gave it out. And so we learn. And purity of heart is not being perfect. It's a little hard to be perfect. Although Jesus said, be therefore perfect, so eventually we get to be. But purity of heart is wanting to know. Just really wanting to know what's true. Divine Mother, I know that you could comfort me. Why are you not comforting me? I mean, one could become angry at God. One could become in despair. I mean, there's this phrase, God, why are you doing this to me? But the same words can be spoken quite differently. God, why are you doing this to me? And that's really the question. The pure heart just asks that question. Just, why are you doing this to me? What is it that I'm supposed to be learning? Who am I supposed to be here? And when we ask the right questions in the right way, then God just flows right into us. I didn't overcome my fear that night of going down under the water. I was still scared. But I wasn't confused anymore. And that's the beginning. You know, the power and the light is there if we'll just follow it. God bless you.